I love your husband. And you love him too, most of the time, right? Most of the time? You just be steady. I'm going to delicately come to you.
Nice.
Wow. Well, you know, I kind of wore similar colors.
You're going with a fall look. We're saying that's a fall look.
It's fall. I'm very fall, yeah. This is fall. This is my fall look. As in, we fell and bumped our heads. Luckily, I was only halfway watching it while I was studying, so I may have been turning some pages very aggressively. We got baby girl. We got baby girl. We know. Who does? Gainesville? What church is that? University? What's he going to do there? What is she going to do there?
Nurse.
Okay. One of the hospital. Okay.
Yeah, she left Shan's very good. Glen Springs.
No, my in-laws used to be. Alicia grew up there. Now they're at a small little church in Alachua called Santa Fe Hills, but they're not even meeting in person.
Do we have that one?
No, well, she heard that in the open church. They had with the mission. It wasn't the mission. That's what he ended up doing. And they stayed there years after all.
Hey, Taylor.
They started. Those things kind of wanted to be almost 2-4, whatever they started. Just over the years.
You should have worn those.
Springs is solid. They're open-minded. They're not. Really? My mother-in-law. I mean, he's good, but just the tradition that he was taught is just, you know, and his mother-in-law's been tugging on it, but it's just the old school. Yeah. There's some. Alicia, what's the chiropractor's name that was at Glen Springs? Last name? Richardson?
You know the Kleins?
See, I know Kleins, but I know Kleins from Tampa. Dobby Kleins?
A chiropractor?
I don't think it's a chiropractor.
Kleins.
I'm not sure though.
And then they've come after us since we've gone.
They're not.
But
Yeah, it's been since y'all been gone.
Way. Dude, that saves you a lot of hours.
That means we can go visit whenever I go.
Hey, that just means that they need to commute here every Sunday.
That's not how that works.
And we need him to like resurrect.
I'm good. I'm good. Like, we're over in
That's
the
it.
y'all go free.
Oh man, you either age out or it's kind of like, well, and here's the thing, some guys that are called to work with you have no desire, it's not their gift to be, and it's almost like once you age out, well, that's not what I want to do, you know? Well, I don't know, like, the church is not, COVID and everything, supporting the guy for
What she'll do, he can stay home for a little bit. Take care of Emily, which is a full-time job, and then.
Hey, you know, there, and that might put him in something. Bring up kids. And Gail? Yes, I would say definitely Sunday morning for sure. I mean, I would say pretty solid. But he's been tapping on the weekend for a while. I don't know if he ever is now, but they've been wanting him for a while. They were definitely him as like those that were like welcoming committee type stuff. They were
Graduated. Yeah, the graduated when she did. So, just gotta get yeah, he has license in Florida. And Ellie said something to me that kind of.
Wouldn't that be nice to have all your ducks? They should just all move here. We just need all them kiddos.
Hello, Elizabeth.
Are you talking to your mama or your Bill?
Elizabeth.
Oh. Hey, I'll give you $1 if you'll whack Haley while you're standing there. Just use your Bible. Shoulder, head, either one. Let's say, because she might run you down. Well, you're on your own after you whack her. So, yeah. That's right. No, actually, let me turn the camera around. We might make some money off America's Funniest Home Videos or something on that. That's a good way of putting that. $1 cost me a lot of money. If everybody hasn't noticed Jan's outfit this morning, make sure you see like top and bottom, the mermaid decked out, and the toenail polish matches. I'm just throwing it all in there. The lady is looking snazzy this morning, and I love it. I don't really like bright colors myself. You know, I'm a very subdued kind of guy, but yeah, very shy, very reserved, but yeah. I love it. I love it. Y'all pray for Bill. He texted me this morning. He's definitely not going to make Bible class because of first appearances. So I don't know what y'all were stirring up on homecoming weekend, but he said he may not even make worship service. So be mindful of him. So hopefully none of your kinfolk are in front of him, right? So let's see. No, both Slaughter boys are here. I was a little worried. The older one pretty solid. The younger one's a little squirrely, so I wasn't sure. Yeah, he's here. Yep, Dean made it. Dean's not in jail this weekend. That's good to know. Shane just I was a little worried. I didn't know if Shane was going to make it either. He might have been in trouble too. So, all right. Have you ever had to go before your husband? If you ever do, call me because I want a video. Do they allow cameras in the courtroom? Because he might have to recuse himself, I guess, for his marriage's sake, not necessarily for legal purposes. All right, I don't know where to tell you to open. We're going to be in 1 Kings 3, but I want to take a little peek at Matthew 1. So I don't know where you want to open, or if you want to open to both, but that's kind of where we're going to kick off. To help Shane for later, anything in particular we want to make mention of before we get rolling this morning? Miss Jane did have an update on Miss Edna Merle that she is feeling better. Obviously, ribs still healing, whatever, but she did me that one this morning. I appreciate that. Like I said, I know Bill's going to be out a little bit this morning. Mom and Dad were better, but Mom.
Her hand has the incision has gotten infected.
Oh,
called in some medicines for him, but it's real swollen.
what was it exactly that they were doing in there?
Skin cancer,
Okay,
but they were having to.
dig.
It was real big.
All right, so the caretaker is wounded, and Dad's still good?
Yeah.
Ish, from what yeah, slowing him down.
Played with Mark.
Played with Mark? You didn't overdo it, did you? Did you take him to the woods? Put some cameras up? Or check some cameras? Hey, ain't nothing wrong with that. You didn't get stuck, did you? Did you bounce him around real good? Did you do any water bogging? No? What? You went to the woods and didn't water bog? Oh, brother. That ain't no fun. Shane didn't get a call to pull anybody out? Man, that's a boring Saturday. What in the world? What in the world? All right. Well, if we don't have anything else. Phil, can I pick on you to get us rolling for Bible class this morning?
Pray for others who struggle in their lives, which we all have in some way or another. Father, that you'll look over us. Help us to cope with whatever we're dealing with. Father, we just pray that we go through this Bible study, that we will open our minds and our hearts to your word, and learn and understand more about how you desire for us to conduct ourselves in this world. And hopefully we'll have good behavior in Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. All right, I'm going to do some Bible trivia with you just to get started this morning. Ready? Who was Solomon's dad? We'll start off nice and easy. David. All right, we got that one. All right, who was Solomon's mother? Bathsheba. What number king was Solomon? The third one. Who's the first one? Saul. Then, let me ask you this, and this is kind of totally unrelated, whatever. Just even Israel having a king. Good thing, bad thing? Carol, what's the no for? That's right. And a lot of the very things he predicted about what's going to happen to your sons, daughters, and I don't have it prepared for this morning, but we may revisit it next Sunday. But there's even kind of advice that God gives Solomon in particular and gives all of them about don't multiply horses, don't multiply chariots. Can you even just think about part of the reason what was behind that about not necessarily multiplying your armory, your army, your strength, even maybe riches, whatever? Just what would be some about not multiplying horses and chariots? Why would God not want them to do that possibly? To prevent war? Kevin, I kind of saw.
It might make a think, or it would make you think that you did something, not the Lord was behind your victory as you went to battle.
And what would be the danger of the kings? Because that's what happens as we go on. What would be the danger of them not seeing their dependence upon? You're a theocracy. You're a God-ordained, God-started government. What would be the danger of them kind of losing that attachment?
They fall away, and it's the same reason they wanted a king to be like the other.
Their nations. And oh, by the way, so once they lost, and let me ask it this way, and we can kind of summarize whatever. How does the king thing work out? What happens after Solomon? Solomon is the last king of, how would you word that? The United Kingdom, not British United Kingdom, but the kingdoms being united. What happens after Solomon? Jeroboam, Rehoboam, northern and southern. Then you got kings of Israel. How many good kings of Israel are there? This is really back far into your recesses. I would say goose egg. The north does not do very well. The southern kingdom, which would be what would be the capital, kind of area of the southern. If Israel is north, what do we call the lower one? Judah. The kingdom of Judah. They would have occasionally a good king that would bring a righteous kind of blurb, whatever. But the whole What? Saul, great king? Yeah, he's tall, but anybody remember any of Saul's big boo-boos? We didn't study him because he's not in the line of Christ, but the offering, remember he wouldn't wait on the prophet, and he offers worship himself, which causes him to break out in leprosy. He's given the command to kill Agag and all of the people. And what happens when they go do that? What do they end up doing? They don't even kill the guy, and they were supposed to not take anything. And what do the people do? They plunder. They keep it and then it's almost a comical scene when the prophet shows up and Saul says, "I have done the will of the Lord." And Samuel's like, "Well, if that's true, then what is the bleating of the sheep that I hear basically in my background, whatever?" And that's where Samuel tells him, Saul, that the kingdom has been taken from him. And the prophet goes to turn away, and Saul grabbed, remember, and it tears. And he says, in the same way, the kingdom has been torn. The whole king thing. David is kind of a bright spot, but is there any ugly in David's reign? We didn't really cover this one recently, but how's that work out? Give me some low points of the reign of David. Murder of Uriah. I told you to turn 2 places. We are going to get to 1 Kings, but in the Matthew one, in Matthew's genealogy, which was the one that we've been following, how does it word there about where Solomon came from? Did you catch that?
I heard who had been the wife of Uriah.
All right, what verse are you looking at, just for everybody else? New King James, verse 6, as we're going through this. Say it again, Kevin. And this one doesn't even mention Bathsheba by name. It just says, oh, by the way, guess who Solomon's mom was? The one who'd been married had been the wife of Uriah. That's David. What else happens with even David's own reign? Remember any other spots? Yeah. And I know I'm really digging into the recesses of just trying to memory because we haven't had time to prepare this, but his son trying to take it, is that a fairly legitimate run at the throne? What does David have to do in the middle of all that? Who said it? He abdicates the throne. He leaves, kind of probably to save him from having to go to battle with his own son. There's killing that takes place as a result of all of that. The kingdom really kind of gets, shattered there a little bit. There, even kind of one of his greatest counselors switches sides there. What some of the dealings between his own, not just the son that tries to take the throne, but what his son does to his own sister. It's not this king thing. God warned him, Carol, you were all over it. And it just doesn't go well. And then where I was going to even go back, Kevin, where we started was, as things start not going well for Israel and Judah and winning battles and losing battles, instead of rushing to turn to God for the source of victory and strength, what do they end up doing a lot of times?
They replace God with their earthly king.
Absolutely. Setting up high places, even other places to worship the foreign God. Man, you can get into the studies of Ezekiel and everything else about basically God does this breaking through the walls and finds idol stuff that wasn't even supposed to be in there. It's not a pretty picture. I just kind of want to throw that out there. I know this is kind of a sour kind of way to start a study of Solomon, but I've done for y'all on a Wednesday night about sin makes you stupid, talking about Samson. I have a sermon that's with the exact same title. It's not about Samson. It's about Solomon. If we were just doing general knowledge of what you know about Solomon or your first thoughts about Solomon, there are some high points, as with all of us, there's highs and lows. But when you think Solomon, and I don't want to steer you one way or the other, we can go positive or negative, but just when you think of Solomon, where does your brain go? What kind of stuff? What's your general association of Solomon? What'd you say, Miss Margie? Okay, wisdom, and that's one of the places I do actually want to read. That is a high point we're going to look at this morning. How does he get that wisdom? I think that's a phenomenal story. And I love this. And we're going to read that a little bit this morning. So we're going to come back to 1 Kings. So I love the wisdom of Solomon. Along that lines, can you think of any books of the Bible that he's author of or predominantly an author of? The Song of Solomon, which is kind of a love story there, which I love. A lot of the Proverbs and Ecclesiastes are kind of the big ones that are attributed to him. And Ecclesiastes especially, because the view of Ecclesiastes is almost of a father trying to give his son wise counsel. And I know, man, I'm really like just, there's a phrase that gets repeated in Ecclesiastes over and over. Anybody remember what that one would be? And there's several, but vanity of vanities gets repeated throughout. It's a picture of a guy that had all the wealth, had all the wisdom, had all the looks, and he has run those things as far as he can run them and say, you know what? I can tell you, chasing that, vanity of vanities, the conclusion of the book of Ecclesiastes is fear God. What were you going to say, Kevin?
I was going to say, nothing new under the sun.
Nothing. That's right.
Fear God, keep it
And fear. Say that is another theme of that. There's nothing new. Look, I've tried it all. Rather than my son of you having to go and find this out for yourself the hard way, the way I did, it's almost like Solomon writing first person. I can just go ahead and tell you, he had all the money to do anything he wanted. He had good looks, and he had all the wisdom, and he pursued, and he did good. He building projects and various things that he did, the building of the glorious things, whatever. But he gets astray there too, and he can say, I can tell you, I've had all of it, had all the opportunity. Let me tell you, at the end of you know what life is really all about? A righteous pursuit of what's not vanity of vanities. Fear God, keep his commandments. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. So wisdom we get there, and he writes a lot of that wisdom literature. What's the other thing that Solomon's probably most famously known for other than the wisdom? Building the temple. All right, and then what's the bad one that he's known for? Man, I like how you said that there. 1,000 women. All right, quote, is it 700 wives, 300 concubines, or is it 300 wives and 700 concubines? It's ridiculous, is what it is. it's yeah, and we're going to read some of it this morning. But what was one of the results of all those wives from all those different places? They sucked him away. They drew him away from the righteousness of God, and to appease some of them, he gets part of setting up other places of worship. So that's a lot of just kind of the big picture look at the life of Solomon. I do want to go back though and read. It's some great reading. I want to do chapter 3. Man, we could read for forever. Let's start with through 15. Let's do 1 through 15. 1 Kings 3, 1 through 15, because right after that, it's kind of a different story, but it's a great story and another well-known story of the life of Solomon. So 1 through 15, if I'm doing my math right, we could do like 3 readers doing 5 verses, right? Is that close? Y'all are impressed, aren't you? Bill, you got your new glasses on? Yeah. Do you want to read or? All right, let's do 1 through 5. You want to do 6 through 10, 11 through 15? All right, let's do that.
Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married one of his daughters. He brought her to live in the city of David until he could finish building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around the city. At that time, the people of Israel sacrificed their offerings at local places of worship, for a temple honoring the name of the Lord had not yet been built. Solomon loved the Lord and followed all the decrees of his father David, except that Solomon too offered sacrifices and burned incense at the local places of worship.
Real quick, his version is saying local places of worship. Do you have something else just in other translations there? The high places. Is that generally associated as a positive or a negative, sacrificing at the high places? It's somewhere else. It's kind of like the northern one and the southern one and whatever. So his version is kind of clean up with the local places, but it's kind of emphasizing, it's going to open the door for why he builds the temple, and it's going to be a good thing, but it's kind of a little blip on the radar. I just wanted to point that out there. Sorry. Verse 4.
The most important of these places of worship was at Gibeon, So the king went there and sacrificed 1,000 burnt offerings. That night the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream, and God said, "What do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you."
Solomon answered, "You have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. But I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong, for who is able to govern this great people of yours?" The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this.
Then God said to him, "Because you have asked this thing, and have not asked long life for yourself, nor have asked riches for yourself, nor have asked the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice. Behold, I have done according to your words. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before, nor shall any like you arise after you. And I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all your days. So if you walk in my ways, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days." Then Solomon awoke, and indeed it had been a dream. And he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, offered up burnt offerings, offered peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants.
All right, from that reading, what do you like about Solomon? What stands out in a positive light with this?
Didn't ask for anything selfish, he asked so that he could help other people.
And how does he word that? I thought that was an interesting point about even like God says, basically ask whatever you want. And how does he even describe himself, which I think is kind of a gesture of humility. How does he word that? Man, and David, I think, was a great leader in a lot of different ways. Obviously, he has his low points as well, but I respect. Where did you see humility in David's life? How about that? He is the man described as being after God's own heart. Where did you see that? Where would Solomon have possibly seen humility in his father? Or at least heard of it. Maybe he didn't see it directly, but he would have at least heard of it. A story he might have heard.
King Saul. David had so many chances to kill him, and he stuck to what God. He stuck to God's chosen one, and didn't kill him every chance that he had.
And even felt regret and remorse for even doing the little things of like, sneaking in or whatever. Absolutely. So you see humility. Where else would you see humility, or possibly Solomon would have heard about his father's humility? It has to do with Solomon's mother. Y'all remember the guy's name that shows up to try to get David's attention about what he'd done wrong? Nathan. How does Nathan get David's attention? Does he just come and confront him outright, or how does he get it? What does he do?
Almost like a parable.
Okay. Do you remember what the general reference of the parable?
Wasn't it that a guy had taken someone else's sheep?
And it was, he loved this
He
sheep.
loved it.
Oh, he loved this sheep. He slept in the bed with him almost as the picture, and he cared for it like it was one of his own children. And a guy that had a whole bunch of sheep comes and takes it from him. And what's David's response? Woo, son. And what is Nathan's famous response? Thou art the man. You the man. And that ain't a good you're the man. You're the man. And a credit to David. How does he respond to that? Significant humility and remorse and repentance. So it's, again, and I wouldn't want to do hard on these guys because David is the man of God's heart, does great things. He is righteous. He is humble in a lot of different ways. Yeah, he has massive boo-boos. Solomon too. And even like a little nod, wink, wink, nod, nod. I mean, does Solomon even get credit by the narrator of the story even before this dream that he has? Did you catch that little bit of line about Solomon and some of this reading? Yeah, what did you catch there? Yeah. So and I even love the way that you are. Except, I mean, so he's. But isn't that Israel to a T? When they get wiped out by the Assyrians, this is the story where God sends lions amongst the people, whatever. It's because they worship God and they didn't have the Lord in all caps. Like they worship God. Problem is they also had all these others. So it wasn't true fidelity. And as a result, well, isn't that Solomon? He worships God. He wants to follow in the steps of his father David, except any applications for us in that? 1 foot in, 1 foot flirting in the shadows.
We talked about attitude. I mean, that attitude says that this is when you're offering sacrifices and incense to God and to somebody or to something else.
That's right.
You're not totally committed to God. It's not your life. So his attitude, their attitude was all wrong.
And we're going to speak in absolutes because that's the way Scripture does. But if you're not all in, you're out. Half in is all the way out. Half-hearted, I mean, that runs throughout Scripture, and that pops up in a lot of different ways of wish you were cold or hot, kind of things like that. And how much of, the greatest command is love God with some of your heart, some of your soul, some of your mind, some of your strength. I mean, just give him some, right? It's good enough, right? Call it good.
But if, like we said, the Old Testament is pointing to the gospel, it's a good juxtaposition of David and Solomon to Christ. Yes, Christ came through their lineage, but if we see their faults at the same time.
Do you not see why you needed him?
Right, we see Christ's perfection.
Well, and I also, and I didn't know those were going to go too, because where my mind goes with the gospel is that there was grace shown to even these men. And God worked through them and did mighty things through, for lack of a better word, sinners, right?
Flawed people.
But did amazing things through some of these. Well, let me just ask you, what else? What other type of people does God have to work with to choose from? I mean, and so it's a symbol for me of, and here, and if I could give you like kind of my simplistic overview of everything of what Christianity boils down to is we're all going to be flawed, and we're going to even see in the sermon, Paul called himself chief of sinners. You know what the difference? Everybody's going to be a sinner, and nobody, right or wrong, nobody's going to deserve heaven. I mean, you get that, right? Not one of us. You know what's going to literally make the difference between saved and lost? It's your attitude. It's the willingness to, you're going to blow it. Even after you get baptized, you're going to blow it. Even though you worship on Sunday and try as hard as you can to be as faithful as you can be, guess what? You're going to blow it. The difference between saved and lost to me is this right here. It's this right here. And because that's David in a nutshell. That's Solomon. And that's Abraham. That's all of them. That's Peter. That's Saul. That becomes Paul. We're all going to blow it. The only difference is, do you want to keep blowing it? Are you going to, use grace as a license for sin? Or are you going to kind of half-hearted be just lukewarm? It's not a matter of whether you're going to blow it or not. It's how you respond afterward. I mean, is that you think that's a fair kind of look at Scripture? And I know that I've been taught, and what I will teach my kids, and the goal we shoot for, brethren, is perfection. That's the image that we've been called to. That is the goal. And I don't ever want to excuse or justify less than my best, right? But reality is, I'm going to blow it. You're going to blow it. It's all about how you respond afterward. Is that you want to whittle on that anymore? That's just kind of, if you want to know what Dan Chaney thinks about my connection to Christ in a nutshell, that's it to me. That to me is the narrative that runs starting with Adam and Eve and runs all the way through to the end. He has an ideal. The goal is for us to be conformed to the image of Christ. That's what we're supposed to be. That's the goal. Have that mind. God will help us make up the difference for where we fall short. We're going to go, Brando.
The Old Testament is kind of the theme of that. It's the Israelites, they blow it, and then they come back to God. And it's repeated, it's like obviously Christ hasn't died yet, so they don't have the
And there was always that remnant. And lest we kind of paint the remnant in the wrong way, the remnant blew it too. This is a whole collective, and that's why I like when some of the great prayers of like Daniel and Ezra does a big national prayer, and even Solomon does a big prayer that we could read in 1 Kings about the people. They do national, we have sinned. We have whatever. And they included themselves in that. Everybody recognized. I think that's worthy for us to point out. We're going to see highs. We're going to see lows. If we were going to tell the story of your life, what would we see? Yeah, Miss Lois has already shown. You mean it's not this? To the moon, to infinity and beyond. How would you like for your worst blunders to be recorded for all of history, for people for thousands of years to dissect and point fingers at you, right? Like, it's easy when it's Solomon. And that's part of the beauty of narrative. You learn better. It helps you kind of that's the beauty of what Nathan did. If you confront directly, it's a little harder because we get defensive, right? I'm going to kind of do, but if I tell you the story of somebody else, then it's like, well, yeah, I can see that just as clearly as I need to see it. And then it's like, oh, well, isn't that the story of the Bible for us? When I read the story of Israel, blowing it over and over, when I read the story of the disciples who like, man, you had Jesus. Why? How could y'all not see? Why are you blundering over and over? Israel, man, you were at the mountain with him. Why don't you see it? So I'm reading that. I'm going, why couldn't you see it so clearly? And then I step back and I go, oh, why don't I see it so clearly all the time? So this is why I love the Bible. This is why I love the Old Testament, because the New Testament is these letters kind of after the fact, and letters giving commands, letters showing us examples, and letters kind of showing us the rules of the covenant, similar to Deuteronomy's parts, right? And Leviticus. There are a lot of the New Testament is less narrative other than the story of Jesus, and it's more these letters that kind of tell us how to be the church. The beauty of the Old Testament is it's the story of people, and we ride their highs and lows with God overseeing it all for his glory and his will and his purposes. And that's why I love the Old Testament. It shows us a lot about the heart of man and shows us a lot about the heart of God as well. All right, anything else about this kind of vision or dream? I do want to give you we're in 3. Flip to chapter 10 real quick. Keep your finger in 3 though, but flip to 10 and look at verse, really we're just looking at the splendor of Solomon. This is when the Queen of Sheba visits. That's the beginning of chapter 10. And he basically shows her all of this glorious stuff that he has, and she leaves just wowed and befuddled. After going through a lot of the specifics about these lions and these gold steps and these articles, blah, 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 look at verse 23. Lori, how does your version read in 10:23?
So King Solomon became richer and wiser than any other king on earth.
I mean, that's a testimony to, I feel like, God blessing him. And there's a lot of things we could study. Solomon's building projects, phenomenal. The wisdom that he employed. Early signs of even like these water duct tracks and like various ways that he did stuff, and some of the garden planting that he did. I mean, you took the wisdom that God gave him, and that helped enrich his people, his nation, for God to work through for a lot of different reasons. Oh, man. So, in fact, one of the big things that we read as we get after they get knocked down by Assyria and then Babylon finishes them off, what's one of the big hangups that people have when they finally get to come home from captivity? It ain't as good as it once was. Yeah, they try to rebuild the temple, and it's like even Herod didn't even restore the temple to the glory that it had in Solomon's time. That's the guy in Jesus's day, Second Temple Judaism, we call it. It didn't compare to what Solomon had done. So I want to give him his credit where he's at. One of the other neat stories, and maybe this is, and I've heard, you probably heard this and not even connected to the Bible, but right after 15, does anybody have like a paragraph heading about one of the stories about Solomon that comes right after verse 15 about him asking for wisdom and then God giving him wisdom rather than the other things he'd asked for? It's the story of 2 women. Do you have a chapter heading?
Solomon judges wisely.
All right, you get why? What did you have, Kevin? Same. All right, this is the story where two women who were harlots come to the king, and basically they're arguing over whose baby is it. They're both claiming motherhood of the baby. Y'all remember this story at all? So how does he display his wisdom in determining who the true mother is? What was his advice to do with the baby? Cut it in half, and y'all can share. And how does the story play out? And that causes him to recognize only and man, how sicko are you to be like, fine, cut it in half, I don't care. It's just like it's a little wink, wink, nod, nod. This is like I've heard this story told. I remember like reading something similar to this in elementary school, and it wasn't even tied to the Bible, just kind of a story of wisdom or whatever. And that just it's a picture of that. We get that. Let's see. The Queen of Sheba, we've talked about a little bit. That's in 1 Kings 10. She travels over 1,200 miles just to basically verify the rumors of how glorious and splendid and wise Solomon is and all of his temple is. It says in 1 Kings 10, 3-5, Solomon answered all of her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. When the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon and the palace he had built and the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. Solomon was a pretty awesome guy in a lot of different ways.
But look at 24.
Okay. Which chapter?
10.
Okay.
People from every nation came to consult him and to hear the wisdom God had given.
And where were you going to go there? Because I don't want to steal your thunder.
I mean, the people knew of his wisdom.
And here's what I love about 24. People from all over came to hear the wisdom that. So there was a glorification of God by the way Solomon used the talents that God had given him, right? It reminds me of Matthew chapter 5. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good deeds and glorify you, your Father which art in heaven. It's like the mirror. This is one of the places I love. Every one of us has been given talents, and they're all different. They're not the same. And this is where you can get into a study of Corinthians about don't be comparing your talent to somebody else's. And because maybe one's a little bit more public or somebody's a little, they're all for God's glory, and especially in Corinthians for the church to be strong and the church to grow. All of us have been gifted in different ways, which helps us collectively be stronger. But specifically, this point is God has blessed you with talents, and you should use them, and it will cause what to happen? According to this verse. Solomon used the wisdom and talents God gave him, and it did what? It caused what? What was the result? God was glorified. I've heard a couple of our men pray, and I love how they're praying it about COVID. I love how they're praying it. They're not just saying, Lord, take it away. I've heard a couple of our men pray, Lord, take it away in a way that there's no other explanation than you did this so that he would be glorified. I love that. You guys that are praying that, man, I love that. I pray that with medical things that come up. Lord, I don't see any way in man's wisdom and the science of medicine we have that there is an outcome. But Lord, if it happens for your glory, let it be done. Or even if it's not your will to just totally remove it, then give them the strength to endure that there's no other explanation than, wow, God is in this person. Or as we overcome the various trials that come our way, man, you guys know people like that. I know you've had to have seen it. Where you know people that have suffered trauma or loss or setbacks or various things, and you're like, how are you so like settled and calm? And it ought to be a golden opportunity to be like, there is a peace that surpasses understanding that comes from somewhere else. It ain't just me. This is really all over the sermon this morning, but guys, it's all about God being glorified. And that's where I want to give Solomon all the credit that I can, because of the building of the temple he does. We can read when he builds the temple, it is a pretty cool scene of God filling the temple and the prayer that he prays that's associated with all that. That's just, it's God glorifying. Let me pull open. Let's while I'm turning and looking at that, any other kind of applications or thoughts? Like I said, I don't want to do all the talking here. You guys know that, but just your overall impressions or parts that you've seen from this.
I've always wondered, how does his life end?
We don't get a lot of that. There's winks of, like, he gives one of the most detailed pictures of aging in the book of Ecclesiastes. That's kind of like in chapter 12, where he basically says, man, enjoy your youth. And then he goes through to describe the process. I don't know. I know there's also little wink, wink, nod, nods that in his lifetime, God doesn't, divide the kingdom for his father's sake and for his own sake. There's a couple of times that God does that for Hezekiah as well. Kind of like, because you showed righteousness and you prayed the way that you prayed, I'm going to spare you from having to see what's coming. You do get some of that. I'm just going to kind of scan parts of, like, any other thoughts on that, because I want to hit that. Any other impressions of Solomon, applications of Solomon, big picture takeaways you have of Solomon, what we've covered so far? I'm not in a hurry, so I just like some of this other stuff. All right, like chapter 5 is the king of Tyre hears at Solomon, and he's the one that really supplies a lot of the things that, like, David's righteousness and David's actions kind of, you even read about David gathering some of the materials. David knows he's not allowed to build it. God says it's not for you. There's a great scene in Samuel where David has this kind of moment of, man, here I am dwelling in a house of cedar, and God, you have to live in a tent. And that just ain't right. David recognized, I have this beautiful house of cedar, and you live in a tent. God, that ain't right. And basically that's where God says, well, you're not the one to do it. Your son's going to do it. And so to set his son up for success, he gathers a lot of the materials, and then Solomon's able to do that. We didn't talk, and I almost went down this path earlier. It's not a hunky-dory transition from David to Solomon. Were you aware of that? It's not just a seamless, and I had actually kind of forgotten about some of that when I was reading before. But before Solomon takes over the temple, one of the other sons of David tries to take the throne. And we're kind of told in that section that David's kind of eyes were dim, that he's very old in a frail condition, whatever. And one of his sons even kind of takes the throne, and through the prophet and whatever, and through Bathsheba, whatever, he basically passes the torch to Solomon. But it's not just a real smooth transition. There's also some things about David that I was reading about, like when he dies, like, remember the guy that kind of cursed him as he was leaving? And David leaves him alone. Well, on his deathbed to Solomon, he's like, I trust that you'll deal wisely with this guy. And basically what the story is Solomon shows a little bit of grace and says, look, you need to die. I tell you what, if you'll stay in Jerusalem, and as long as you stay there, I won't kill you. Well, the story goes, the guy finally loses Jerusalem. Guess what Solomon does? He sends Benaiah, kind of like Joab was one of like David's enforcers. Benaiah is like Solomon's enforcer, and he whacks that guy. And there's a couple of things where, like, David showed grace in his lifetime, and it basically the way that he words it on his deathbed to Solomon is, I trust you'll use wisdom in knowing how to work this out. And pretty much that's like wink, wink, nod, nod. Guess what Solomon does through Benaiah? You got grace in my lifetime, and I left, and then you get taken. All right, in chapter 6, he starts building the temple, and you get some of the dimensions for it. Again, I'm just kind of scanning some of this. I want you to skip down in chapter 6 to verse 11. This is, again, he's building the temple. Even in chapter 3, and this is where I want to compare 6 verse 11 with what gets said here. At the end, and I think Kevin, you were the one that read it. 14 of chapter 3 said, so if you walk in my ways to keep my statute, my commandments as your father walked, then I will lengthen your days. If is what kind of word? It's conditional. Chapter 11, and we'll just read it because we're almost out of time. I just want to read 11 through 13. Mark, do you want to read that? Read chapter 6, 1 Kings 6, 11 through 13.
Then the word of the Lord came to Solomon, saying, concerning this temple which you are building, if you walk in my statutes, execute my judgments, keep all my commandments, and walk in them, and I will perform my word with you, which I spoke to your father David. And I will dwell among the children of Israel, and will not forsake my people.
I almost want to come back to this next Sunday and not rush through Solomon, because what comes after this is when he does, God taking up residence in the temple is a big deal. And the part of Solomon's prayer is about, we understand God is too big to dwell in things made by man. Like, we know that, but God kind of acquiesces to this and even commands, and he sits in the mercy seat and his glory fills the temple, guys. It's glorious. One of the saddest pictures of the Old Testament is in the book of Ezekiel. After their lack of faithfulness is when you see the glory of the Lord depart from the temple, and he kind of watches it figuratively go and pass over the hills and leaves. I want next Sunday, if it's okay with y'all, I want to come back to and kind of study a little bit or read a little bit more in depth the glory of God coming to this temple. This is where I want to give Solomon his credit, because it's foreshadowing of God taking up residence with man. And it's neat. So if y'all are okay with that, next Sunday, we're going to stick with the Solomon theme. If you want to kind of peek through some of this 1 Kings section, we're going to look about God kind of filling Solomon's temple. All right, we'll stop there.